So Joe Heath is partner, head of practice, D&I culture and ethics at Green Park, also known as DICE. Joe is an equity law improvement professional and a diversity inclusion auditor working in this field for over 20 years. She's worked with global organizations in private, public and third sectors, carrying out complex inclusion audits and cultural impact assessments. So not diversity audits, but inclusion audits. Her clients have included Linklaters, HSBC, Office for National Statistics, Amnesty International, BT Group and EDF Energy, to name just a few. We also have joining us Iain Benjamin, who's the Managing Director of Digital Execs. Ian's an experienced headhunter and recruiter of mid to senior level digital talent in the UK, Europe and the US. He's over 10 years experience in this space and his focus is to recruit Black and ethnic digital talent for inclusive employers, typically digital and tech firms and from the creative sector. Ian is also the owner and host of the Digital Hub podcast, focused on ED&I issues with guests from the digital sector. I think he'll have it in his background, as you can see. So a very warm welcome to you both. For this part, we're going to focus on recruitment. So if I can just start off with Joe, if we could have a spotlight on Joe, thank you. Joe, what would you cite as key organizational and behavioral barriers that organizations face when recruiting ethnic minority talent at all levels?
Thanks, Javed. And honestly, Frank, I didn't pinch your material. I did write this last night, but there's lots of crossovers with what you shared. So for me, there sadly are a number of barriers, but what I wanted to do is reflect on perhaps the top five that we identify fairly consistently across our culture and inclusion audit. So the first one is that we still seem to see a huge issue in terms of an organisation having an ingrained cultural fit. So this is present in their evaluation of candidates and in the decisions that they make about succession planning and also future promotions. And many of the diverse employees at all levels that we engage with, they regularly state that there is this prevalence of a culture fit mentality and almost a set of unwritten rules that describe the attributes expected of future leaders. And many of those just simply find it impossible to break into. Now, what's interesting about this is of course, isn't about a wonderful set of skills and capabilities that need to be demonstrated. It's actually much more linked to the comfort levels of the dominant communities that go on to recruit and promote in their own image. We often hear about them not wanting to lower the bar or compromise on quality, or we need the best person for the job. So, you know, to align to what Frank said as well. But actually, when you unravel that, when you indeed put it to the test, you see that many diverse candidates will outperform their counterparts, as is also the case when you assess candidates from a non-red brick university who also seem to outperform. So we can dismantle that myth, but it's still there in its entirety. The second area is that recruiters and hiring managers often don't really have a good understanding of the barriers that ethnic diverse talent can face, whether that's career gaps or more frequent moves from one organisation to the other, whether it's differences in education or perhaps qualifications obtained from abroad. All of these things can often be seen quite negatively by UK-based recruiters and hiring managers, which doesn't take into account the disadvantages that some candidates may have experienced in other organisations for them to feel not included and having to move more frequently. The third area, which of course, you know, Frank has already touched upon, which is that organisations and their leaders are not racially fluent and they're not confident in engaging with ethnic minority candidates. So sometimes their targeted efforts around recruitment can come across very inauthentic and tokenistic. And this simply puts off high calibre, quality, diverse talent who just want to be valued for their skills. The fourth one for me is around external brand perception and also employee value proposition. And if an organisation has a reputation of being very white, ethnically diverse talent are simply likely to look elsewhere. So the lack of visible diversity at senior levels, which plays out on their websites, the lack of role models potentially, the lack of diversity in imagery and communications and on interview panels, and all of those things affect the level to which we perceive a company to be inclusive and diverse. They also don't really tailor their employee value proposition to the different strands to be more attractive. And in order to do that accurately, it's not just someone in marketing that makes that decision. It is about engaging and hearing the voice of the employee and the customer who is of that diversity background. And then finally for me, and I'm sure this has been articulated far better by Frank, it is that organisations, whether proactively or organically, have appeared to focus much more on attracting diversity, but they've paid very little attention to creating that inclusive environment. And they've just kind of expected that a diverse set of individuals will come into an organisation, will fit, will thrive, progress and succeed. And sadly, we find through our audits that that's not the case. For many of those individuals, they land in an organisation that isn't an inclusive ecosystem. They don't have that sense of belonging. And ultimately, they start to dull down aspects of their cultural identity. And I've seen this starting as early as the first interview. And ultimately, what that relates to and ends up being is higher levels of attrition for those diverse groups, and ultimately going against an organisation's stated aspirations around diversity. So that for me is my top 5, Javi, but could have gone on a lot longer, of course.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think especially a couple of your points leads nicely into Iain, whose focus is on engaging, attracting Black and ethnic minorities in the digital and creative sectors. So Iain, many organisations do struggle to attract this talent. Can you tell us how you go about doing it?
Cool. First of all, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to be part of this today, and to Raj, yourself and Donna and the team. So sure, happy to kind of contribute, and hope everyone can kind of get some value from this. So, I mean, Frank alluded to this a few minutes ago that BLM, George Floyd, a lot of corporations have jumped on the bandwagon, if you like, and how much of their commitment to diversity, inclusion from a hiring perspective is authentic. And from my experience over the last 2 years nearly, it's few and far between, few and far between. And a lot of them are kind of conducted a bit of a checkbox type of exercise, as I think kind of like Frank alluded to as well. So the individual clients that or the individual candidates that I've reached out to over the years for any sort of vacancy within the digital space, and it could be a great vacancy that I have, and I reach out to a young Black lady or a Black male or an Asian male or whatever. And the issue is they tend to sit on their hands when presented with something that's amazing. And being a father of an 18-year-old boy, it worries me because this is kind of continuing to happen even over the last 2 years, because reaching out to them with an opportunity, and they don't want to take that chance of being in that interview process for 4, 5, 6 weeks or even longer, and being rejected consistently and consistently and consistently. So that trust element is what companies need to put back in place with their recruitment process. If they are serious about hiring Black and ethnic individuals, the trust element needs to be there from the outset in terms of how they show their authenticity and trust. And so what I have done with my clients is to work with them by getting them involved in the hiring process from the outset. So when I'm reaching out to a candidate about a vacancy, the collateral, the material, or even better, the videos that we produce collectively, in some instances, they're just on Zoom recordings where members of the team that may be of color or maybe not, or maybe part of their D&I team, are talking about why they joined the company, talking about the values of that company, talking about what problems that company solves, but also, essentially the individuals that are reaching out to, that are candidates, can see individuals that look like them, that work in an organization. And so, that is what's going to instill the trust that is gone from a lot of individuals who are essentially sitting on their hands and not developing their careers. And regrettably, something that I see on a daily basis and weekly basis, and I have done for many, many years. And I was hoping over the last couple of years that would start to to be eradicated, and it hasn't as of yet, because the authenticity from a lot of employers isn't really real. I'm not saying all employers. I mean, some of my clients I work with, I have got D&I committees set up in place, etc., and so forth, and the dial is being turned in the right direction. But Black and ethnic candidates need to feel as though this company really is real. They are sincerely doing something. They want to improve it. They want it from the top down, from the board that we spoke about earlier as well, and it's going to filter down through the organisation. How do they know that's really going to happen? And so in terms of that candidate attraction journey, that's where I encourage my clients to do that, in terms of showing individuals that there are ethnic minorities already in the companies, enjoying their careers. They're not going to be jumping jobs every 3 years, where as opposed to a white individual, it's typically 5 years. Black and ethnic individuals are statistically known to move jobs more frequently because of that, because they're not getting up the ladder as more often as white individuals. So showcasing the company's authenticity in terms of D&I, what their commitment really is in terms of learning and embracing other cultures, and getting that in the collateral in the video that's a couple of minutes long, for example, and that allows me as a headhunter to reach out and show the candidates, look, there are people there that about you. So that's what I do on a regular basis, and that's what I encourage companies to do, because the trust is gone, and it's just, how can I say, it's hard for me to accept it sometimes when I'm speaking to a candidate about a role that's an absolute shoo-in for that individual, and I go, no, I'm done. I don't want to go for that journey anymore, Ian. I'm not going to go for it anymore, Ian. I've done it 8 or 9 times or whatever, and they just can't go for that anymore. And so to build that trust visually and authentically, to showcase the authenticity of that employer, is what I recommend to help bridge that gap.
Thank you. And not just recruitment, trust is a common thing I'm hearing about, making or removing the barriers of exclusion or making things inclusion. So trust is absolutely the hard things. So building on that, Joe, what has Green Park and or DICE done to support organisations to remove some of the barriers that is impacting on progression and recruitment?
Yeah, thank you, Javid. I really reiterate on kind of Ian's point there around the trust. I think building trust internally, but also individuals have had negative experience going through recruitment process previously. It's really important that that kind of brand damage is repaired. So what have we done? So we've done numerous end-to-end reviews and cultural audits. And the point of that is to really get under the skin of the pain points. An organisation will have some assumption where bias may exist across their recruitment journey or the employee experience, but actually it's sometimes misplaced. Sometimes there are some less obvious places by which there needs to be some solutions put in place. So our audits normally reveal 2 types of recommendation. One are process changes and the other are behavioural changes. But I guess to get really under the skin, we've got to work really closely with the people making the decisions. So that will be the internal recruiters and the hiring managers in this case. And we've worked incredibly hard to really encourage them to think and act differently about talent and to get them to apply this different lens in their thinking. So we talk a lot about how they need to start viewing talent from the perspective of culture add versus culture fit. So many of us would have heard this statement of culture fit. No one can really define it. It's more of a feeling, but actually it makes no sense. And when we think about fit, we think about the same. When we think about add, we think about different. So if we want to get some different outcomes, we can't just keep doing the same. So we talk about how an individual candidate can be additive to the existing culture. And that has started to, I guess, ring true to a lot of recruiters to guess be a bit more broader in their considerations. We've already, had some level of discussion about the fluency and the fear factor that some, particularly white leaders and managers, are feeling at the moment. We know there is a fear of engaging with difference more broadly, but particularly in having conversations around race. So how on earth does that play out in an interview process? If they fear that they won't be credible in understanding someone's lived experience because their frame of reference is simply so different, or they fear they'll have the right language or terminology to engage, this absolutely means that candidates will have a different experience and for no fault of their own. So we've worked really hard to turn that fear associated with race into curiosity. And for us, that's the first step in really building cultural connectivity. We also, and I think, again, Frank touched upon a particular initiative, which is about diverse interview panels. Now, you know, we could argue whether we think that's progressive or not, whether we've seen effectiveness in that. But I guess I've seen it on both sides. I've seen where it's had no impact, and I've seen where it's been quite transformational. But I just want to share a really, really quick example with you. In a recent audit with a very large client who had actually implemented diverse panels. In fact, they've gone a step further. They mandated ethnically diverse members to be part of that panel. Now, unfortunately, when we did our review, whilst they, you know, waxed lyrical about how great this was as an initiative, sadly, what we found is it had not had the desired results. Those individuals, to Frank's point, hadn't had the traction, hadn't had the influence. Unfortunately, it hadn't moved the dial in terms of the diversity profile. And actually, whilst, yes, of course, the hierarchy piece come into play, it was also just about numbers. So the reality is there's going to be probably one diverse person on a non-diverse panel, and that panel could be, you know, 5 or 6 people in total. And what we found when we spoke to those individuals is, whilst they tried to have influence, whilst they tried to challenge, the organisation and the rest of the panel just simply wasn't up for the challenge. In fact, what they could see is, you know, first-hand affinity bias playing out in front of them. And eventually what happens when we keep trying and we don't get anywhere is we conform. And actually what we found is, even for the diverse member on that panel, they started to adopt another level of bias themselves, which we would call conformity bias, where they simply gave up challenge and just conform with the status quo. So they jumped in on allowing that unfair decision to be made and perhaps bias to be sort of reflected in the process. So that for me is a quick kind of recap on some of the things that we've done, Javid. Thank you.
Thank you. And just on it, someone said to me, and I've never heard anyone do it, you know, if I'm recruiting for someone, I shouldn't be on the panels. So my bias will not be involved in that, and other people can be more, what's the word, neutral to it, saying actually Javid may not like this person, but they're ideal for the team. So just an interesting thing, but I've never heard anyone do it, but I do understand that. Thank you. Just conscious of time, Ian, I'm going to have to ask you to do this in 60 seconds, if that's okay.
Here we go.
Just building, because you've covered quite a lot actually, but just building on, do you have any other recommendations for organizations that want to recruit more employees from the ethnic minority backgrounds?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be around getting involved at different points. If they're serious about it, getting involved at different points of the candidate journey. So, for example, if somebody applies for a vacancy, and or for example, having a non-biased applicant tracking system that takes out the names or the different red brick universities, etc., takes that data away from their CV, and then it's looked upon as being what it is. You know what I mean? So there's no perceptions in the process. That's something that's been a couple of my clients do that right now. Something that's been introduced more and more. Yeah, don't just plonk a video on the website about how diverse you are as a company. Get it in, use that communication tool as part of the candidate attraction journey. Use it because it works, and it's not that hard to do and to implement with a headhunter like myself, or with whatever your internal recruiters. Do that, and because it wins. Individuals like to see who's there. But yeah, definitely non-biased applicant tracking systems is one way. I've only got 60 seconds, so I've got to shut up, but I could talk about it all day long. So thanks for the opportunity.